Hello, everybody, and welcome to Droids Are Welcome Here, the geeky podcast where we just want to talk about the things that we all love, the passions that bring us all together. Today, we have a very special guest, our good friend Dr. Chris Kempshall, author of The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. For some background, Dr. Chris Kempshall is a public historian and author who specializes in transnational experiences of warfare and modern media representations of history, particularly in computer games and the Star Wars franchise. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's fun to be here.
It's been a good couple of years since I think we did our last interview. I don't know how time flies that fast, but we got to do this more often.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing because the last one was kind of a mix of battles and maybe history and
I
politics?
think it
Question
was,
mark.
yeah, we definitely touched a little bit on that, and then since then, you've gotten to write quite literally the in-universe book of history.
Yeah, like
Of
a ton of stuff has happened.
just a little bit. So I'll open with one of my favorite quotes from the book, and that's that from the introduction. History tells us that given enough time, all empires will fall. But if we do not also come to understand how and why they rise, we will remain trapped in this cycle forever. And I think, as a fellow historian, I think that is a fantastic quote to open up this project. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? How did you get into this?
So I mean, yeah, effectively, we're just thinking about that line. It's always good to start with like an optimistic, uplifting banger to begin a book. So yeah, I mean, as the introduction says, basically I'm a historian. Predominantly, I kind of my background was what I studied for like my PhD and the like. Was in the First World War, kind of like how Allied soldiers got along with each other. But beneath the surface of like academic professional Chris lurked incredibly geeky Chris, who was desperate to break out from his bonds and chains and kind of go out and explore the world. The two look very similar, kind of geeky Chris and professional Chris at the best of times. And after I did that kind of academic history, First World War stuff, I then did a little bit of kind of a fair amount of work on First World War computer games and kind of computer games and how they depict history and war. And then I made another jump further into the geeky mire into how the Star Wars franchise uses real world history and kind of real world politics as a kind of a narrative device. And because I was writing that, I got onto the radar of the good people over at DK Books, who invited me as a result to kind of help them co-author the book Battles That Changed the Galaxy alongside Jason Fry and Amy Radcliffe and Cole Horton. And then kind of, once I was in, I really wanted to stay in. It's a fun house to be in. So I've been kind of desperately trying to kind of carve myself a nice little niche to live in, kind of adjacent to Star Wars and DK, really.
It's definitely a very fun universe to be in, and that's been honestly that's been one of the biggest unifying factors in every author, every creator, every actor, every actress that I've talked to is just our shared love of just geeky things, of just, you know what? I'm having fun. Let's
Yeah,
just go with it.
yeah. You'll struggle to meet. I've met most of certainly the non-fiction authors of Star Wars now. I haven't kind of had the opportunity to meet many of the fiction authors, yeah, outside Jason Fry, Adam Christopher, and the like. But collectively, you will not find a geekier group of people who absolutely love this than the people who work on this stuff. It's a big part of their lives and their personalities.
That sounds like a great opportunity in the future to do a nice little roundtable of just get a good cross section of people from nonfiction, from fiction, and just, throw them in a room, see what happens.
Well, the dream would then be like an enormous book. But I think in the interim, a very fun conversation about how you get to enjoy and do the geeky things you like. But also, I imagine for a number of certainly for me going thinking back into the past when I used to write a lot of Star Wars fan fiction. And was, the dream for me, and I imagine for a lot of the listeners is, God, one day I'd really love to write Star Wars. It doesn't matter if that doesn't happen. The act of actually enjoying the thing you enjoy and being creative about it can be enough. Because I'm aware of how wildly improbable it was for me to go from academic historian who also sometimes writes Star Wars fan fiction to being able to write Star Wars book. It's not a path I can tell anybody else how to walk.
I think that's right there. That's the quote for this. Is just the only thing that really matters is enjoying the thing you love.
Yeah. Oh well, there we go. The job done. I think everybody's enjoyed
That's
the
it.
podcast.
Interview's done. Let's all get out of here. So I'll open up with our first question, which was, tell us a little bit about the origins of this project. You know, where did some of the concepts come from, and what was the journey to making this a reality?
So, I mean, as I said, I've enjoyed writing Star Wars, and as a historian, there are things about Star Wars I find super super interesting. And when I got invited to take part in Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which is a kind of an in-universe history thing, it kind of straddles the line a little bit, but certainly the four of us wrote it as if kind of with an in-universe voice. And quite early on in that process there was a little voice in the back of my head that was basically kind of nagging away at me, going, "Is there anything in particular you're waiting for, Chris, in regards to flagging up some of these other things to the people who've hired you to write a Star Wars book? Is there something? Was there a better moment that you were waiting for than the next 5 minutes?" So I pitched it to David Fenterman at DK really, really early on, in a sense of, I think this would be a really fun book that I'd really, really love to write. And David has, he's got a background in kind of the humanities, history, art history, archaeology, and the like. And he understood, he got it. But all of these things take like a surprisingly long amount of time. So to kind of put some of the timeline for you and for the listeners in that so it's 2025 now. There wasn't a Star Wars celebration last year. There was Star Wars celebration 2023 in London, and I think there was Anaheim in 2022. And Battles must have come out in 2021. So I sat down with David Fenterman in like January, February time of 2022, um, before I went to Anaheim, which was my first Star Wars celebration, and talked about how the book might look, how we might pitch it. And it then took the entirety of that year to get to a point when it had worked its way through all the pitches and kind of all of the signing off things, and then must have signed a contract either at the very end of that year or quite early in 2023. Um, and didn't we then kind of put some rough bits and pieces together, but I didn't start writing it until after properly writing it until after Star Wars Celebration London. Because I had a chat with Mike Siglain while I was there about it, and then I had a meeting with a bunch of DK and Lucasfilm people in the immediate aftermath of Celebration. So it was only in kind of April, May time 2023 that we actually started writing the book. So the time period of, when I was writing Battles, which must have been 2020, to actually starting to write the book that I'd had the idea for is quite a long spread of time. Um, and so, had lots of kind of time to kind of think about it. And at any point, for any number of reasons, it could have been like, actually, this isn't going to happen, or we're going to kick this down the can, or any of these things. So there was a really, really long kind of lead in to it. But I'd seen, me and David had seen how well Battles had gone, and to test the water of that kind of in-universe thing. Kristen Baver's Skywalker Family at War had come out in that intervening period because I'm pretty sure she was signing copies of it at Anaheim. Because I was in her signing line for it. And you could start to see some of the non-fiction side of the Star Wars publishing thing start to kind of align that would allow a book like this to possibly come into being. But yeah, it took quite a long time to just go from I have an idea, me and David talked about it, to it actually becoming something that we could start writing.
And I think that's something that not really a lot of people ever really even considered was just how much desire there was for something like this, for something that's looking at it not from, the creation side of it, not from the in-universe side of it, but from the in-universe historical side of it, of what ties all of these events together. What is the unifying aspects that um, transcend all of these stories?
Yeah, we kind of hoped that and suspected that there would be an audience for it, an audience that basically looked very much like me and David, for it that would really really like it. But you never really know until the announcement when it came out. and how people kind of excited people were for it was our first sign that actually this might land exactly as we want it to. And then obviously once the book came out, and it seems that people have really liked it, which is great. But it's that kind of slight unknown of, we think we're right that there will be an audience for this book, but there's no way that we know for certain. So we're just going to kind of have to guess and kind of cross our fingers and hope that this is a thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that it landed the way it did. I know that we had talked about when we did our last interview, me and you had talked a little bit about your desire to take on a project like this, and I'm really glad to see it, it finally coming to fruition. And if anyone hasn't read Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, please drop what you're
Oh, my
doing,
beautiful book.
leave your house, go out right now to the bookstore and go buy a copy because you will not regret it. And I'm even
Four
just
by
gonna
10.
and I'm even just gonna give you just the chapter titles alone for any historian out there. Just the four chapter titles of Rise and Consolidation, Part One, Part Two, Expansion and Oppression, Part Three, The Galactic Civil War, and Part Four, Fall and Continuation. Any amateur historians out there, these are all themes that you will understand, that you will realize that you've been looking at this franchise through this lens for all this time and not even realized it.
Yeah, they everybody out there who has kind of these kind of leanings, and again, I think there's quite a Venn diagram of like geeks, Star Wars fans, and historians. I think there's quite a significant overlap in there that you're our people. We will look after you and hopefully give you things that you like.
What aspects of your own experiences as a World War One historian did you leverage to help with writing this? Because it actually screams like a legitimate history book, and it's great.
I've always said, and I said kind of like in relation to battles, that there's like a really thin line in audience response from this reads like it was written by a historian and this reads like it was written by a historian, and the tone of voice basically defines whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Um, and we wanted to kind of have it land on the excited side of the line for it. Um, but I think it's a really good question because I think that the kind of the real payoff for this, in kind of in my background of um, being a First World War historian, is kind of like multifaceted. Firstly, it's one of the big things I really wanted to transmit to the audience was what it feels like to be a historian undertaking research. Some of the emotions, some of the considerations that might come up. Um, and that was kind of important to me because I wanted the audience to get an understanding of what it means to be a historian. Basically, what is it that historians do? How do they go about their business? How do they argue? How do they structure their arguments? And I've been kind of saying to colleagues, I reckon I could use the introduction of the book to basically to teach undergraduates how to write essays, because Beaumont Kin, my guy, goes through and really lays it out. He talks about his sources, he talks, he thanks his archivists, he talks about his conclusions, he talks about you know what his major kind of themes and his kind of semi almost what his research questions are, and he talks about his own role in the arguments and all of those bits and pieces which were really important for me to kind of have front and center. But I think in regards to like the content of the book and how we go about kind of exploring bits and pieces about the Galactic Empire and kind of uncovering evidence and talking about those types of things, I think the main kind of thing that I fell back on is, I've spent slash wasted a lot of my life in archives, in looking at kind of archival documents about any number of things, and as a result, I have an understanding of the type of thing that you find in archives. What type of historical material survives, what kind of sources continue to exist, what kind of documents continue to exist, because one of the big kind of research, not even research questions, one of the big kind of conceptual questions that we had to answer. And when I say we, I mean myself, I mean David at DK, I mean with Lucasfilm as well, is how does Beaumont Kin know the things that Beaumont Kin knows? Because Beaumont Kin hasn't watched Star Wars, and I have watched Star Wars, and that feels like cheating. Um, so how do you take the events of Star Wars and ensure that some of that survives in some form so that Beaumont Kin can draw upon it 30 years after the events have happened? Um, and because I've spent so much time in archives. I was able to basically construct an idea in my head about, okay, if I'm watching A New Hope, what do I think of this is going to make it in some way, shape, or form, so that Beaumont can draw upon it, and what stuff is not going to make it, so that Beaumont can't draw on that stuff, and then convert that into this kind of historical archive construction that lies at the center of the book, that Beaumont is drawing all of his references from, and kind of saying, I found this in an archive and this tells us this, and I found, the minutes of this meeting and this tells us something, and these diary entries tell us something else, and convert as much of the entirety of Star Wars into things that would plausibly survive, to an extent that they can then appear in the book. And I think that's probably kind of the big payoff of having been a historian, and not in the sense that, if one of the other non-fiction writers, they could quite easily write, a book like Rise and Fall. It would be different, but that doesn't mean it would be better or worse. But I think the fact that I have spent so much time in kind of historical environments meant that I was able to kind of convert some of this stuff in a way that hopefully felt real for the readers and the audience when they were kind of going through it. What you were saying, it feels like a history book. And I've tried to infuse it with as much of the feeling of historical research as I could.
That is such an interesting way of looking at it, and I think a lot of people really wouldn't consider that aspect of, I could go pull up A New Hope right now and see word for word, what's happening. But after the start of the movie, the events on the TNT-4, realistically, the only historical records that are going to survive are Princess Leia's recollections of it
Yep.
and the falsified Imperial records of it. So how do you, go about piecing those together to find that common ground of what likely actually happened?
Yes. Yeah, exactly that. And even if you expand it out over the full trilogy, I've been saying that, there are some things that are never going to appear in records. No one is keeping minutes. There's nobody in the corner of the room every time Darth Vader and the Emperor talk to each other, because that guy's going to die real quick. That's a job that's constantly going to be advertised. Every 15 minutes a new vacancy has appeared, because no one's allowed to write that. No one's allowed to sit in and listen to that, and no one's allowed to write that stuff down. So all of that stuff is gone. Despite, which is, well, it's super, super interesting, but quite a lot of that narratively feels a really important exposition for us when we're watching things like The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, um, and the like. But it means that all of the information transmitted in those conversations is never going to make its way to Beaumont Kin. So we had to find ways around the really big kind of narrative exposition discussions that are just they're never going to make it into an archive. No one is going to be allowed to be in that room.
I think you tiptoed around that pretty masterfully as well, using things like, other Imperial record or other Imperial officials' own personal memoirs about it, their own, leaked transmissions about it, things that maybe they said to a friend that then ended up getting recorded somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a cool way to get around that the little realities of history.
Yeah, we had to get pretty inventive with it, because there's some stuff that, we really want to put this, this is really cool. This is intrinsically Star Wars, but we're gonna have to try and find a way of convincingly fudging it so that we have an actual lineage. You can see the steps it's gone through to eventually arrive in Beaumont's hands.
I do think it's really funny that it also includes like criticism. Like I've noticed that Beaumont does not like Thrawn at all.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that was important for me, and it's kind of the extension of showing people what historians do. What is it that it mean to be a historian? Is it's okay for historians to take a stance on something. The idea that historians are these kind of apolitical entities that just exist in pure balance, and they'll look at all the things and they'll weigh it up, and then they'll deliver you some kind of pure truth, is not something that I recognize in my actual life. So I couldn't, I had no interest in trying to craft a realistic feeling history book to try and reproduce that in the Star Wars universe. And any of the listeners who've read the book will absolutely kind of have read it and go, wow, Beaumont Kin has feelings about things, and he's very clear in what it was that he wants the audience to take from this book, which means at certain points, Beaumont Kin, yeah, he's going to take a stance on something. He's going to, point at particular characters and go, some people look at them in particular ways. I don't think they're that person at all. I think, a far better way of looking at them is like this, based upon his interpretation of evidence. So yeah, he's going to draw some conclusions about Thrawn based on what he perceives to be the way that other people look at him, because at its heart, this book is a revisionist text because it's written after the events of Rise of Skywalker. Beaumont is almost basically looking back on 30 years of galactic history and going, "Wow, we were way off. We need to look at all of this again." So some of the criticisms that the critiques he makes of people, what you get as part of that is a little snapshot on what the rest of the galaxy must think about that person. Because if Beaumont's going to argue against it, he's not going to be arguing against a thing that is like a ridiculous notion for people. And sometimes he'll be like, wow, people look at Thrawn and think this about him. I disagree. And you get two interesting elements of that. You get Beaumont's argument, but because he's arguing against something, you get a little glimpse of what the popularly held belief must be in the galaxy.
I think also that I think we're all no stranger to the fact that the Star Wars fan base is very opinionated, is probably the nicest way to put it. I think it's a great way of looking at it in terms of maybe we're both looking at the same thing, but we're both just drawing different inspirations from it. We're both just drawing different opinions from it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that my opinion is more valid than your opinion. It's just we both had different takes on the same thing. And that's
Yeah,
okay.
and Bomo's pretty upfront about that. Certainly in the introduction, he talks, some people are going to disagree with my conclusions in like a month's time, a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. We might find out more. And then somebody will come along and do a revised edition of my book because they've got more information. And that's fine because that's what historians do. We're always revisiting things. We're always rewriting things when we get more information. So I think, Beaumont is fine with people kind of critiquing him or disagreeing or kind of rewriting it when we find out more. But what he wants people to kind of take away from it is that he never wants his criticisms to be baseless. He's very, very diligent in kind of laying out all of where his ideas are coming from, where his kind of interpretation is coming from, and kind of rooting it in some form of evidence.
Is there a chance that in the future, because of the success of this book, that we might see other rise and falls, like, the rise and fall of the Trade Federation, rise and fall of the Confederacy of Independent Systems? Do you think that's a possibility for the future?
I mean, sure, anything's a possibility. In a sense, a lot of people since I finished the book have been asking, oh, are you now going to do like the Republic, the Rise and Fall of the Republic, or the Rise and Fall of X and Y? And my thought process firstly has been like, geez, like I only just finished. It's a really long book. It was only supposed to be 90,000 words, and it's 120,000 words long. So I overwrote it by a third. Um, And the idea for the book for me was not just the title, The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. Beaumont was so important to it. It's like he was even in like those very early pitch meetings when I sat down with David before I went to Anaheim. It was like, here's the idea for the book, and Beaumont is the guy because I envisaged this as a revisionist thing. It's as much about the aftermath of Rise of Skywalker as it is about the Galactic Empire, and therefore to do another history-esque book along these lines, it's not just about the topic for me. It's also about, well, who's the author for it? What is the time period in which they're writing it? Because those things are so important to the story. Beaumont's narrative arc in the book is so intrinsically important to the book, that you can't have the Galactic Empire stuff without Beaumont. So in that sense, it's entirely possible that whether it's me, but I don't know at the moment, or one of the other non-fiction authors could absolutely come along and do, like, as you said, the Trade Federation or something like that. But from my point of view, it would have to be very clear in my mind who's writing it and when. And at the moment, I don't have that for kind of various other ideas. That it has to be about not just about the topic, but it has to be about the person writing it.
You mean Beaumont doesn't want to write about the Chiss Empire anymore?
I think Beaumont needs to go outside and like touch some grass and breathe the clear air, because I didn't leave him in a great place. Undertaking a horrendous history on a planet of nightmares. Um, I think Beaumont needs a vacation and needs to go outside.
As we all do.
as we would, I mean, not outside on Exegol because that seems even worse. But outside somewhere else, somewhere better.
Send him to Lake Naboo.
Yeah, Naboo would be great. Yeah, yeah, Naboo might be healing for Beaumont.
New lighthearted comic series is going to be Beaumont Kin goes on vacation. And
I'd read it.
it's gonna follow his adventures as he visits Naboo and Coruscant, all the nice places in the galaxy.
Yes, or whichever ones are left.
Give that man a break. Give that man a vacation.
Yeah, he's done enough, I feel, for the moment.
I don't think he's gonna want to go to Coruscant. Not after this.
No, to be honest, I don't think he's going to want to work with me again after this. Yeah, I think he appreciates the work that we did together, but I don't think he's a big fan of me.